Welcome to Facets of Design. This is a podcast created by Lixil Global Design. We're really excited to be here with a really interesting guest today. My name is Paul Flowers. I'm your host. As usual, we're live from our studio in London this time, and there will be lots of noises in the background. One would expect aeroplanes flying over, but that's what live podcasting is about, I guess. And so please bear with us if you hear any noises. But we're hoping to hear lots of noise from our distinguished guest, Deborah Dawton, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Design Business Association. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Like many of the guests, it's just that it's been kind of a pattern right now, but we've known each other for some time. I guess I worked for you. I seem to have worked for everybody, I guess. I served on the board of directors for a while. And of course, I've been a judge on the Design Effectiveness Awards. Maybe you could just introduce yourself. That would be great.
Sure. So I took the job at the DBA 20 odd years ago. I am not someone who does managing very well.
Okay.
So I never thought I'd be there for this length of time. But the nature of the design industry is that there's no one day that is the same as the next. And so for the organisation, there's no 1 year that is the same as the next one or the one that's gone before. And so it's just been one of those jobs where we've had to constantly look at what the needs of the industry are, fit to accommodate those needs and to help solve some of the challenges and the problems. And so every day is different. And I love it. I get to work with amazing people like you and others who very generously give up their time to get involved at a board level, or it might be at a committee level and so on. So it's an exciting place to be and a real privilege.
Yeah, and we're going to go deeper into the DBA as we go along, hopefully, and stuff. But, obviously we set this podcast up because we wanted to share with creatives that are entering the industry or studying or even established. We wanted to share the path that successful individuals have taken through the creative industries. And yours is fascinating. So maybe we could just start there. How did you get from studying? I know we studied at the same university, actually. So how did you get from studying industrial design at university? And actually before that, what got you into design and then on to university?
Right. So I'm a bit of an unusual character. So I was brought up in Belgium and France, moved to the UK, ended up in Scotland, and I won't name cities for not wanting to upset anyone, but let's put it, after 3 years in a particular city, I'd become feral. There's no other word for it. I was threatened with expulsion from school at quite a young age. And in desperation, my parents got me to go and sit an entrance exam for a very posh school, which kind of blew my mind, considering I was feral at the time. And that school took me because I could speak French fluently. So they saw a spark of something.
Oh, wow.
Now, the other thing I could do, but they didn't test for this, is I could draw. So I got a place and a bursary and a sort of like an assisted place in a school because my parents were technically low income. And I was given this amazing opportunity to kind of get parked in a school for 3 years that kind of really sorted me out. And I'm not sure if it was the school or the people in the school and the other people that you're rubbing shoulders with. So I spoke French fluently. So I was in the top group of French, but I was bottom group everything else.
Wow.
But I was probably the star in the art class for drawing. And eventually I worked out I wanted to do industrial design, very much prompted by an art teacher. And I knew that the only way I could afford to do that was I had to get 3 of my higher exams. So in Scotland back then, the grant system meant if you got 3 hires, you got your fees paid. And one of those hires had to be English. And I was destined probably to fail English. So, and that's kind of the mixed upbringing in Belgium and, quasi-English French language that we use. So I would use French words in my everyday sentences because I couldn't be bothered to learn what the English one was. So grapefruit for me is one I have to really think about because it's pamplemousse and it was pamplemousse first. So I had to get those 3 exams and I was, French obviously wasn't going to be a problem. My maths was kind of all right. So I was probably going to be okay on that. But the real problem was the English. And so I sat under a staircase with another girl from the top group of English, and I learnt the top group English syllabus for my higher exam. And I taught her perfect word French for her French exam.
Amazing.
Needless to say, I passed the exam and I got a B. I got hauled into the headmistress's office because they could see that I'd written about stuff that I hadn't been taught about. And so rather coyly, they congratulated me because, in fact, they then learned that another student had taught me this curriculum.
Incredible.
Anyway, it got me the marks I needed. And that allowed me to apply to the industrial design courses that I wanted to do. And then another blow came. Because we'd lived in Belgium, I was considered an international student. So the fees were never going to get covered at that point. And so in order to qualify for this Scottish grant system, I needed one more year of residency in Scotland, or one more year of residency in the UK. And that came at the expense of Bournemouth College of Arts, Bournemouth College of Arts.
Sounds about right.
Where I did 2 years of technical drawing. Which is a bit like, it'd be like chaining.
2 years of GAs.
Yes, it's exactly that.
Wow.
Which will explain why I revolted when I eventually got into industrial design and refused to do GAs for all of my major projects. So I did 2 years of GAs, but I was at a level that I could draw a cutaway of HMS Belfast. That was one of my projects from a set of plans. Could see that, that wasn't the future I wanted. I really wanted to be an industrial designer. So went back to Newcastle, got in, was one of 7 girls out of maybe a year group of 30 guys. Then we realised we were the guinea pigs. So the idea was, if we get more girls into the course in 1 year, will they make it to the end of the 4 years?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've got lots of opinions on whether that works or not. But that's how I got to Newcastle.
Well, that's amazing. And we're going to talk about education later, and that's quite interesting. I don't want to go too deep into that, but we will circle back to, how you had to find your own route through to get to that position. You could study at Newcastle Poly, at Newcastle Uni to study industrial design. And, there not really being the mechanism in education to pick up on people perhaps who weren't academic in those particular subjects, but were highly creative. I think what people are really excited, I guess, to understand is, what is the Design Business Association and how could they get involved in that? What drew you to that? And and what value does that bring to organizations, and the link between, I guess, industry and the government? So many questions in there, but I know we can cover all those as we go through.
So what is the DBA? The simple answer is it's a trade association. When I arrived donkeys years ago, so 2003, I think it was, I have to say that sounded really unsexy. And so I kind of wanted to brush that under the carpet. Yeah. I work at a trade association, it's not quite what you envisaged where you'd be. What became evident, though, is that they all look and feel very different. So I schlepped around a load of associations, institutes, whatever's got that type of a name. Yeah. Looked at what I thought was good and bad in all of those organisations, and then decided to pick off 1 or 2 key things. It was a very small organisation, so we had probably about 150 members. The good thing about the DBA is it covered all of the design disciplines. So I've since seen organisations around Europe that are discipline specific, and I consider that a bit of a handicap. If you've got the whole of the design industry operating at its absolute best, it really is a force to be contended with. When you break it down, you tend to get kind of like the fights between the different factions. Kind of get over it, guys. You all do a brilliant job. You just all need to be pointing in the same direction and moving forward. And the epiphany for me when I arrived was, there are brilliant designers out there and they are making a pig's ear of running a business. Yeah. Because we weren't trained to do that at university. And I'm not sure that I think the university is the right place for that. So I do actually think it's the job of associations in the market to deliver that level of knowledge into people at the point where they need it. So it's something that we do at the DBA. A lot of our stuff is focused on some of the basics of finance and the basics of recruiting, the basics of contracts and so on. It's all that stuff that you need to get started. All the way up now to the sorts of issues that could hamper a design business in the UK from being able to flourish and make a profit. Yeah. So that's where the government piece comes in. So if the government was to decide tomorrow that all designers should be paid £10 an hour, I go into bat.
Okay.
So that's my job.
Well, it's a very important job for lots of designers.
You'll be glad to know they haven't.
Thank God that you're
they
around.
They haven't decided to do that. But they might, for example, put in place some immigration policy, which means that UK design agencies who export a lot of their services, so they work for international clients. Government call it export, we call it just working for international clients. They will have difficulty shipping their people around the world to work on that work or bringing talent into the country because we need native speakers. We need the people. We all know design isn't just something that someone does outside of the context of the environment that you're designing for. And so sometimes if you're working for another culture that is wildly different to the British culture, I mean, you guys will be familiar with this. You'll have Japanese designers sitting in the States. You might have French designers sitting in Hong Kong, and whatever it might be. Yeah. And so that freedom of movement has become more and more difficult in the last 10 years. And so that's one of the areas that I talk to them about. Yeah,
that's a huge challenge. I mean, of course, when you restrict that kind of freedom of movement, when you're a global organization and you want to have, and we spoke about this earlier, you can have empathy and you can project and use research to understand different markets. But it's really nice when you have this mixed cultural hubs like we do around the world, because that's why we have these offices all over the world, is for that reason. They bring tremendous insight and empathy and understanding, local knowledge. But mixing that up and taking that from office to office, then it almost creates a completely different way because of the cultural input, creative cultural input. I think you really come up with different solutions and different approaches. Yeah. And, we're always looking for new ways to approach things to give us different answers. Yeah. And that's incredibly powerful. So it's quite sad when you won't have that kind of, that freedom. Yeah.
And government's understanding is get a translator. So they think that's the answer to the problem. So take a British translator who speaks Japanese to the meeting in Japan. And what we're saying is, no, this is much more nuanced than that. Yeah. There's an awful lot at stake if that translator didn't get things absolutely right. Yeah. About capital investment in products. You can't get things wrong in those types of meetings. Yeah. And so it takes a level of experience, understanding of the cultures that you're designing for, and so on. And if we want to continue to build design businesses that are world leading, we've got to listen to what they need. Yeah. And we've got to enable that to happen for them. Yeah. And international talent is very definitely one of the things that we need, partly because we don't train people to speak many languages at school. It's not compulsory in the way that it is across the rest of Europe. Yeah. And so you're not going to pick up the designers with a second language typically coming out of UK universities.
That's quite interesting. I was going to talk about education later, but I think this is a perfect opportune moment to discuss education, because I think it's just my observation, having two children. I think we probably have got a lot better in the UK at introducing languages now, but it seems like it's the opposite with creativity. It almost feels like with the point system, the systems they have in higher education and school, that you're almost educated out of creativity, or there's, I would say, definite barriers in place not to push you into that direction, which I don't know how you find that in education, but do you see those barriers? And is that something you address when you talk to government officials, etc.?
It's a big subject. So yes, it is. I think probably the three key areas for us with government, and we're growing this side of our activity now, is education, so the future workforce, and you could argue the future reputation of design in the UK. Issues around working here and being able to run a good business, so things like visas, immigration, other barriers to trade that you might find that mean that we have a swathe of people who can't make things here and take them to another country now. You're going to probably have to make it abroad. Yeah. So how do you enable that to happen? On the education piece, of course, we're talking about people who are committing, you have to commit maybe 8-10 years of your life to an education system that at the moment feels as though it's really trying to channel people into those areas that industry needs. And so you end up with quite a distinctive route that people are being pushed down and encouraged to go into. And there are just some of us who are round pegs being shoved into square holes. It's just not going to work. It's interesting, if I look back to my education, I could have done the other subjects, but it's not where my heart lay. Yeah. Maths and physics were probably my two other strongest subjects next to art, and just happen to be able to speak French. You try and do that combination in school today and it's very hard. Maths is normally overlaid on art or design and technology. And so if we're wanting to bring people into into design, then we're actually making it really difficult right from the very beginning. And I can remember years ago, we were addressing the audience at the Design Effectiveness Awards, and there was a government minister there. And it struck me when I was talking to them that, I mean, in essence, the first thing we can all do when we come out of our mother's wombs is we draw and paint. That's how we communicate. Before we talk, we daub, we're painting stuff. And the education system just snatches those paintbrushes out of people's hands. Yeah. And so, that thing that was really natural is then made to feel pretty unnatural. And by the time you're 5 or 6, you're becoming quite self-conscious about this stuff. And so you start to pull back from it. And yet you've got someone like the World Economic Forum saying, we need people with creative thinking skills, ingenuity. I think that's because the nature of the challenges that we're facing as society have become ever more complex. Yeah. Designers have the ability to see very complex systems and make them simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting, people are quite happy to assume that if 2 in 100 people can play the piano at a virtuoso level, the idea that 2 in 100 people could solve problems that quickly is anathema to them. And in fact, they don't like it. Yeah. And we can. Yeah. There are people who can answer. I suspect you're probably one of them. Half of your team will be as well. Not every designer is. Yeah. But it's, and
it can be applied to other areas, right? I guess being a problem solver. I know, if you're a designer, people think you're a designer. For people listening, I think that's the nice thing about design education is it teaches you to be a problem solver, whether you take that into industry or whether you take it into an organization where you're practicing design. I think that ability to solve problems is something that is needed in all sections of an organization. But more importantly, I think with the, let's say, the push with AI in particular, new technologies, education gears us up to retain knowledge. Can I remember something that I will be judged at? It's called an exam. They will judge me on the day, what did I remember? So it's about knowledge retention. And if that's the only measure of intelligence, what about knowledge application, especially when we're in a world with AI and different technologies now where you don't really need to have a fantastic memory. What you need to do is to take all this incredible information, like you say, and distill it down, simplify that, to apply that knowledge to do something. One would imagine that creativity really should be more interesting right now as AI starts to disrupt for the first time, not just like the Industrial Revolution, manual work, manual labor, but for the first time, these kind of white collar jobs, office jobs, accountancy, finance, all of those jobs are going to be disrupted by this tool. So will knowledge retention be as relevant as knowledge application in the future?
It's interesting because I really think designers see things in quite a different way. So I'm married to a designer. And the conversation we had last night was, I was reading an article in the paper. I won't mention the company has made a load of people redundant because they've brought in an AI efficiency to the business that means they don't need these 500 people. And I looked at Jim and I said, Jim, what do we do with these 500 people? Most people might be really surprised that that's the question we'd be pinging across, the dinner table. But that's how designers think. It's okay. Well, how can we deploy those people? Now, it would be nice if businesses knew that if they were going to do that, they've given some thought to what they're going to do with their 500 people. And Jim's answer was, well, the care industry is short of people. Yeah, why aren't we retraining people?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you would have thought that in the 500 people that made redundant, let's say, even if there were 50 of them who have got all of the gifts and talents that you need for the care industry, but we don't think like that at the moment. So there are simply areas that aren't going to be able to be done by robots. I don't really want someone looking after me, a thing looking after me when I'm 90. I'd rather have humans in the room doing that. I mean, it will affect all areas, but I just think people aren't bringing designers into these conversations. And I think there is an answer to what you do. What do we do with the 500 people? Yeah. People need to work. People want to know they're contributing something. They want a purpose in life. When you take your focus off yourself and you turn it onto other people and you start doing things for other people, actually, it's it's really nice. I'm in a really privileged position where I get really nice emails from people.
Yeah.
And it'll be random. And there was a message on LinkedIn from someone yesterday saying, great webinar on Monday. And, learnt a lot. And there are 2 things I can apply to what I'm doing. And, if only one of the 100 people that was on that thing was impacted, great. We did our job. Designers need to be brought into these conversations. It's why they need to be. If I had my way, I would be in the school system filtering for all the creative people. And if you can't do creative, go and do the academic stuff. It's the other way around.
Okay.
Because we're going to need as many of these people as possible coming into the sector, because businesses have got some really big issues.
That's quite refreshing to hear, actually. I've never heard anybody quite say it like that, but it's it'd be interesting. So we've talked a little bit about artificial intelligence and its effect, I guess, on wider industries as well, but just the focus in particular on the creative industries. We spoke about creators' ability to problem solve, that concept of, not just holding knowledge, which devices hold now, technology hold, and you can access that instantly, but it's about how do you apply all that knowledge and simplify that. So, one would imagine that puts creatives in a good position. How do you think creatives stand against other industries in terms of the, let's say, intrusion of artificial intelligence and big technologies like this?
The interesting thing about problem solving, and a lot of designers would say that's their key skill. I don't actually agree with it. A lot of people in industry problem solve. So it's not a unique skill to designers. The unique skills that designers have are the ability to create desire and usability in the things that they design and produce. So designers go one step further than just solving a problem. They make the thing manifest in the world. So they have the ability then to take a product to market. They have this ability to realize the ideas that other people have in a way that will actually work with manufacturing processes, whatever it might be, within the cost constraints, within the capabilities of the business that they're designing for. And it means then that if you're capable of doing that sort of thing, you're also capable of looking at what's coming down the line. And so I think a lot of what's happening to design under the AI banner is happening to design. We haven't walked into that conversation of our own volition. And so we had an event with a group of design leaders, and the question we put to them is, who owns the conversation on AI in your business? And most of them were saying it's in tech or IT. What a dangerous place to put it, I say. Because the only thing, and finance, the only thing that will come out of that is efficiency, productivity improvements, cost savings. There's very little on that side of the business that is about the future of the organization. And that is the designer's role. The designer's role is to say, look at the capabilities of this thing. We manufacture what we manufacture today. In 10 years' time, we could look like this.
I was going to say, actually, to go one further about the designer's ability, I think their superpower in organizations in particular is the ability to think in a context that doesn't exist yet. So a context that might need different services and different support for that particular thing to be relevant in that particular time. And, to take the organization on a journey, if you like, to where it could be, where it might be more relevant in the future. I think that's one of the things I've found in my career is that, the ability with my team is to really show opportunity and visualize that opportunity and all the complexities around that. And also a kind of map to how you might get to that opportunity. And I think that's a superpower for designers. And, there aren't many industries, I think, or if you want to call design an industry, but there aren't many, I think, people that could visualize that out in that way and then have the ability, like you say, to create the object that,
Yeah. I quite often use an illustration where I talk about design being the yeast in the business mix. So I throw up a slide of a lovely loaf of bread, get people to shout out the ingredients, and someone will shout out the yeast. And the next slide is all of the things on the table that you need to make a loaf of bread. And there's this tiny little packet of yeast. And the illustration is design is the smallest component quite often in the whole of that chain. But it has to go in at the right time. And there's no pun intended. It has to be allowed time to prove itself. So most companies get the timing wrong. They bring designers in too late. So quite often, it's always amazed me that that businesses issue briefs to consultants, consulting designers, and then they do the work and send it back. I mean, I'm being slightly reductive here. Did they double check that the brief was actually the right brief? So, because the brief is the answer to the problem. So if there is a problem in business, the brief is the solution to the problem. And therefore you're just doing the work. And what I'm saying to the design industry is, before you start work on that stuff, you've got to check that they got the brief right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because otherwise you're reliant on all of the experience and knowledge that person has within the organization to have got the answer right in order for you to be able to do your work. And I've spoken to designers who got halfway through a project and discovered we're doing the wrong thing.
I mean, it's really interesting that you say that, because actually what we were mapping out, I can't say too much obviously about our strategies, but we mapped out, what efficiencies we get from AI that we could then channel that time into other areas. And what we've really landed at is, of course, how do you create a better brief? How do you spend more time on what we call pre-search? So doing all the research before you even start. Often research in organizations comes at the end and it's comparative. Do consumers prefer your product over the competition? But actually something we've done is really gone back to the beginning and just said, all our research needs to come at the absolute beginning. We need to create an amazing brief where everybody's aligned, all stakeholders. We have a clear direction of what we want to do in our midterm strategy, long-term strategy, and how that will affect that. And then if we can then deliver that, everybody's aligned. So you're not looking for sponsors. There are no surprises midway through a project. It's much more efficient. Ultimately, that's very much the Japanese concept of working, really. Actually, it's going slow to go fast sometimes. It's really insightful, but having all that information collated at the beginning, whether that's research, ethnographic research, or trend research, macro trend research, it's just compiling all that stuff at the very front. We know what our products are going to look like in the end. We're confident enough. We have brand DNA, visual DNA, so we know what they're going to look like. We don't ask consumers anymore to tell us what should our things look like. We want to know at the very beginning, what pain points do they have? What opportunities are there? What things don't they know could really help support their lives and make life more interesting and better? So it's interesting you say that about this concept around spending more time on the brief, the value of the brief. I think most organizations I've worked at, they really don't spend enough time creating that perfect aligned brief.
And I think, when you're client and designer, which you are, you're working as a designer within the business that you design the products for. If I can put it this way, you've got the luxury of being able to determine all of that. And I completely agree. There comes a point where, as designers, if you've been there for a while, intuitively, you know the brand, you know the business, you know the customer. And so your ability then to get things to market is at it almost moves up to a phenomenal rate, because you've just got a depth of understanding. In a consulting situation, so where, let's say you're putting the brief out to somebody, they're starting from scratch. Now, you're probably not going to give them the sort of project that they would have needed the 10 years experience for in order to be able to respond appropriately. But they might be the sort of person who you could give the wild card brief to that says, what could this look like in 10 years' time? For a lot of the marketing-led companies, so if you look at FMCG, packaging, those are briefs that are just being churned out. And you could argue that if designers weren't designing their responses now sustainably, then they're not doing the client the level of service that they need to be doing. So I had an epiphany a couple of weeks ago, and someone was asking me about how you train designers. And they happened to be writing the assessment stuff that for university courses that all universities use to determine what the curriculum is going to look like. And I was thinking about it, and I said, so, well, you know what? I said, designing a designer hasn't changed. So it shouldn't be any different. I said, so the education I got 30 years ago for the design bit should be absolutely no different to what someone is getting today. The core of what a designer is. I said, the big bit that's changed is the context. Yes, they need to understand about AI. That wasn't there 30 years ago, didn't need to do that. Yes, they need to understand about sustainability. We had a bit of that. It was kind of personal preference. If you were kind of one of those people who was bothered about that stuff, you started to think about it and so on. And I think what's happened is, particularly in the higher education system, we've ended up with people trying to change the core of what a designer is. And actually, I think we need to get back to the core of what a great designer is. And then we furnish them with all of the knowledge they need to be able to exercise their gifts and talents in the markets and in the sectors in which they want to operate.
Well, actually, that's a nice lead on, because obviously this is quite UK centric, this conversation. What state do you think the UK creative industries are in? And what does the future look like in your opinion?
I keep a very close eye on lots of people. So my job is to talk to a lot of people. We've always had links. We're members of the Bureau of European Design Associations. It's really important that we get a sense of what's happening in other countries. And I think everyone's finding it tough at the moment.
Yeah.
I think one of the conversations I had with a designer recently is that if I could encourage design consultancies to do one thing, it would be to try and understand the business of design consultancy. Yeah. So the creative stuff you can do hands down. It's just, we're great at that stuff. But the things that make a difference to your well-being in running a design consultancy can make the difference between boom and bust.
Yeah.
And I describe life in a design consultancy, it's a roller coaster ride. There are some very big highs and there are some very big lows. Yeah. And in fact, the way you manage your way through the high will determine the smoothness of your journey through the low point. And so I've seen people come through what we've just been through in the market reasonably well because they tucked some money away when they were flying high. They are also aware that if they're going to make it through, let's just say it was bad for 6 months and then it's bad for a year. Can you really keep your business going for a year? And I've seen it, it's possible, but you've got to make hard decisions. And so there's something about the sector in the UK that means that it just feels a bit more commercial than a lot of countries. It might be something to do with the Design Effectiveness Awards. So as you know, we have this award that rewards designers for the impact they have on the businesses that they work with. And so there's already a commercial intent on that, or it could be behavior change. It's not all about money. It could be about changing people's behaviors. There's just a bit of savvy, I think, sitting in British design consultancies that means that they need to understand that. The result is, I think outside of the UK, we have the largest proportion of large agencies anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. And people listen to the podcast. So you mentioned it briefly earlier, where you said, obviously, design education, it doesn't seem to prepare you for that kind of business. And I've worked in consultancy, and I've had run my own consultancy, and I've worked in house. And you're right, obviously, for a consultant, or a consultancy, you're really managing a business as well as all of the creative stuff. And many designers aren't prepared for that in their education. So what advice would you give to people to give them that kind of knowledge that would allow them to be able to set up their own businesses and the people you work with?
So I'm an industrial designer running a trade association. How do I do that? I go and read the books. I go and talk to the people who are doing it. And then I sit back and look at the sector that I'm doing it for and determine what I think the right course of action should be. And 23 years ago, I was about to say it was 3 industrial designers, but it was 2 industrial designers and one branding person, or 2 people in industrial design and one branding person saw the potential in me to do that. I'm not sure, quite honestly, I'm not sure I knew that the potential was there. Yeah. So I think for
Was
anyone...
that like a mentor, that person, that individual?
No, I've never been a mentor person. Oh, okay. I just go and ask the really tricky questions, and then it just goes in, and what comes out, comes out. Listen to what people are saying. So the point of that was, here were 3 people that were saying, we think you can do this job. And it interested me because I'd always had, although I graduated in industrial design, my first job was actually with the Royal Society of Arts on their Student Design Awards. And so I can remember sitting in a room with David Carter and Betty Jackson in fashion, and like the top jewellery designers, footwear designers, Dick Powell's of the world. The whole lot of, and I was just sitting there thinking, wow, this isn't meant to happen until you're 15 years into your career. And when you saw this group operating, you just thought, what an amazing industry. And the idea of going and working in one area just wasn't going to work after that. I'd already decided industrial design wasn't the thing for me. I'm too impatient. So the idea of being sat behind a desk, which is what my picture of industrial design was going to be, pushing a product out the door for 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, you were with a load of GA drawings. It just wasn't going to happen. But
for young people studying, it's not like that, by the way. It's not like that.
So it's a really exciting thing to go and do. So, but I had other gifts and talents. And I think that's two things I would say to people who are graduating this summer is look really hard at yourself. And if you can't do that, go and talk to people and ask them to do it for you, to tell you what they think you're good at. Yeah. Because it's soul destroying if you just keep applying for jobs and you don't get them. Yeah. And it may be that what you wanted to do isn't within your reach just now. It might be in 10 years' time, but there will be something. Yeah. And take wise counsel. So you stand to learn so much. And if you can get a job with a company like yours or with a design consultancy, go and learn off the back of other people.
I heard somebody talking about this the other day, and they were talking about beginning of your career, just trying to acquire as much knowledge, bank that knowledge, even if you have to go in a slightly different path, even if you have to get paid slightly less, bank that knowledge, because each time you build that, you build experience that open up opportunities for you. And that's what's been so interesting about some of the guests we're having on the Facets of Design podcast, is we're trying to really paint this picture that there isn't one channel or one route. And what you said is really fascinating, actually, about, and I love this about individuals that I see do this, which they're very inquisitive, but they're tenacious, and they do ask lots of questions. You know, the smartest leader in the room is the leader who asks the most questions. In my experience, every single time, a brilliant leader, what separates a leader from a manager is the leader will be confident enough not to pretend they're the smartest person in the room. They will ask lots and lots and lots of questions. And I think that's really good. The more you can ask questions, because the more people you interact with, they probably all have more knowledge than you in that subject. So the more you listen to them, and they can guide you. And if you're fortunate enough to be, organizations like yourself that you spend tremendous amounts of time, very generous with your time, talking to the consultancies, talking to businesses and individual designers, giving them guidance, networking. I was at an event with Philips Design at the weekend, and somebody came up to me and they said, "Oh, Deborah said to come and say hi." And I know you very much do that. You pull people together. And that's really important, especially in these times, I guess, more than ever.
I care.
Yeah.
If anyone was to ask me about what I think the drawback with AI is AI doesn't care. We care. We care about the companies we work for. We almost can't help it. The other people in the companies we work for might think we're mad that we care as much as we do. But there's something about the character of a designer that says that I'm getting up this morning and I want to go to bed tonight having left the world in a better place than when I got up this morning. And I don't know quite how you summarize that in all of us, but we do it because we care. Yeah, take solace. AI doesn't care.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. I've been giving my own children counsel about careers in the future as well. And career is an interesting word, but I always say it's not as clean and simple as saying do what you love, but for me, it really is do what you love.
If I could start a rebellion tomorrow, it would be that.
Yeah, really do what you love.
So, why are we trying to channel people into the stuff that we think they should be doing if it's really not the stuff they want to be doing? Yeah. And so I can remember talking, it was a friend of mine years ago, was made to do nursing. She wanted to be a journalist. So she does the nursing degree, and what does she do straight after? Dad's got no control over this anymore, goes and does journalism. Wow. What a complete waste of time. Now, you could say, she'd be a really interesting nurse, medical journalist.
Absolutely.
Which is a possibility.
Empathy, high on the empathy scale.
And so I'm all for, if you've got these quirks, add them to what you do. I was talking to a group of students at the RCA, and there was a girl from Los Angeles there. And I said, well, what are you going to do at the end of the course? She said, well, I'm going home. And I said, oh, that's a strange thing to do. And she, why? And I said, well, LA in LA is just LA. I said, LA in London is LA in London. Yeah. And I said, are you telling me that there isn't a business in London that doesn't need all of the, the cultural know-how and that about the first 20 years of your life spent on the West Coast of America? So I said, go and find the companies who are selling into those markets, if that's what you really want to do. Because you've got one thing that the other 50 people in this room don't have. You've got LA. Now, there might be someone else that's got another type of influence. And I would love to see more people coming back in or coming into our industry from other
your lens
industry
is different,
sectors.
Isn't it? I guess you have a different lens.
I met a 62-year-old doing design in Glasgow, and he was the 62-year-old in an art college where the kids in the classroom, I'm really sorry, were 16 to 18. But when you've got 62, and it was a really interesting dynamic. All of a sudden, they had someone the age of their grandparents sitting on the same side of the desk. And the lecturer who taught this group said that he had no problems with discipline because there was one of him sat in the year group. And I'm just thinking, why don't we do mixed education more?
That's incredible, isn't it?
Because they're going to this person for advice, or this person is on their side. It's not an adult telling me how I should behave. But, I might just ask them a question and see what they think about a particular issue. And so much of what we hear about today with social media is young people's peer groups has become their peer group of young people.
Yeah.
So the ability to inject wisdom into that, which comes from age and experience, is very difficult.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think a plea I would make to everyone in the design industry is please try and get some of these young people under your wing and inject some of your wisdom into them, because it's really tough for them.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, it may be worth mentioning that universities are really open to I know I go back, I give lectures at Newcastle where we studied. We have a scholarship fund there. We take students at Lixil from various universities. It's quite easy, actually, to get involved with education and universities for designers that are listening to this. And it's really rewarding when you do that. And spreading, like you say, the younger you can penetrate, let's say, and get into those younger areas of education and give people confidence to do perhaps stuff that they're struggling in because they're not getting the support in education.
Yeah,
it'd be great if industry could go back in and support them in that way.
I think it's the only way. It's the only way we're going to solve the diversity issue. So I know that a lot of design businesses would love to have a more diverse workforce. And we're not seeing the graduates come through university. I suspect it's got something to do with the price of a university course. And so one of the things we're looking at, and I think something we have to look at as an industry is, well, is there a way to get people into our industry if they can't buy their way through a university degree? And so that is something that has to change. We need musicians, we need actors, we need theatre technical staff, we need fashion designers. The whole area of the creative industries is under pressure. And so I think this has to be a creative industry solution to, right, what does creative education need to look like in schools? And how do we make sure that anyone who wants access to this stuff can get to it?
Yeah.
Which means every school needs to be equipped with the wherewithal to do that. And at the moment, they're not. So they're not assessed on it.
Yeah.
They're
not incentivized to do it.
They don't need to do it.
Well, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned it very briefly earlier, but the Design Effectiveness Awards.
Yes.
So, I'm a big fan. I've been a judge a few times. I'm a really big fan because what makes it very different to all of the other design awards, you're looking at measures that can prove how effective that design was. And not just financial measures, but also could be purpose, responsibility, sustainability, all of those aspects. The Design Effectiveness Awards has, it's just grown over the years, of course, it's become more important. If you could just explain how you set that up, why you set that up, and what the future looks like for an award program like that in the next 3-5 years.
Yeah. So I'm not the brains on the Design Effectiveness Awards, and the group of people who set that up back in the late 90s, credit to them, they could see back then that the conversation that they would always have, and it was just design consultancies and the DBA at that stage, they could see that the conversation they would always have with industry is prove it. Yes, you can tell me that you can package my goods in something that looks nicer, but kind of, unless you can prove that it's actually going to sell me more stuff. And so the awards were set up back then. It's gone through, I don't like the word iteration, but it's gone through various stages.
Yeah.
There are various words, design words that are banned at the DBA. Iteration's not one, actually. It's just not one we ever use. Co-creation is banned. Design thinking's banned. That's another conversation. Anyway, we've got the awards, and the discipline of talking about your work from the point of view of the impact it made is something all designers should be able to do. Now, it's not much fun to do because it requires you, once you've designed something, to hang around for a bit to see how well it did. But a lot of design agencies today have got to understand what the scheme is about, and it's actually part of their briefing template. So they're saying to the client, and I would say to clients, if you're commissioning a designer and they're not asking you about how many of these things you want to sell, walk out the door. Go and find the people who talk to you like that. So it's up front in the brief. What are the dials that you're trying to shift on this? And you're right, it's not just about selling stuff. So we had a surgeon who came up, or a kind of a psychiatrist surgeon who came up with an idea for an app that she felt could make a difference to kids that want to self-harm. Now, how do you measure kids not self-harming? Is quite a difficult one, but she was able to put together the story around the app, and we were privileged to be able to see 2 or 3 videos from 2 or 3 of the teenage users of the app who explained how this thing worked and what it had saved them from doing. So design can do that. Design can change people's behaviours. And you could argue that buying something, you've created some sort of behaviour change in somebody. So in essence, it's what we're all about doing. So in that particular case, being able to reward this meant it just got a bit of profile, got picked up by other people, and so on, and probably picked up by more young people who needed something like this. But there was a level of design sensitivity in that meant that the designers absolutely knew what the teenagers were prepared to do and not do. Yeah. So do they want to talk to people or not? Actually, no. Which means this app has got to do a hell of a lot to help these people at that point, because they're probably feeling pretty low. But then we need to shift more books, we need to shift more tabs, whatever it might be. And so the challenge really is to be able to evidence that the work that you did resulted in the business impact that the business was looking for. And it kind of takes us back to the question about the brief. You know how important it is. If the measures are in the brief, if you're trying to... I can remember years ago, Jim was asked to design an iron, but it had to go in at number 2 in the market. I don't understand how you do that. I don't need to design the iron, so I don't need to understand how to do that. But he can, and designers can. You can give them a brief that says, because they couldn't erode market share from number 1 because they owned 4 and 5 or something like that. That was the marketing experts on that bit. Wow. But designers can work to that sort of a brief when they really know their subject and they know the market and so on and so forth. So the challenge then for businesses, I think, is to demand more of their designers. If you've got people who are capable of doing this, go and find them and exercise that muscle and get them to deliver those sorts of returns for your business or your charity or your not-for-profit, whatever type of organisation you are. The plea to designers would be, please go back and ask the questions about how effective the stuff was. Because in the most part, it usually works, and it usually works well. The great thing about that is it furnishes me with case studies that I can use with government.
Are those case studies available?
They're DBA, all available on the DBA's website. You can download them for free. If you're sitting in packaging, there are lots of packaging case studies. Please read some of the industrial design ones and vice versa, because there will be working contexts that you're in where people will be thinking differently or behave differently. And, one FMCG can be very different to the next. And it might just be that an insight from the way industrial designers work really helps in another market and so on.
And also consultancy versus, I guess, corporations, because consultancy, it's really important as a consultant to show the value of the investment they're placing in you. But also, even in corporations, I think, when you're looking for sponsorship to get organizations to move in a different direction, it's really nice when you can I've used some case studies, for example. You can use your case studies to show that, applying things in a certain way, there are similar patterns that could be relevant. Yeah. So it's a powerful tool as well when you're convincing and looking for sponsors.
Yeah. I think the reason for doing it is different if you're a consultancy to maybe if you're an in-house design team. So for consultancies, it's the ticket to more work.
Yeah.
On those occasions where you get asked a free pitch, you don't need to. You can say, well, look, tell you what, we'll send you a case study of the value we added to the last business we worked for.
Yeah.
We can run through exactly the same, methodology or thinking. You're not getting as much as you could. In corporations, of course, you'll understand being able to point to the return on investment enables you to win perhaps bigger share of budget, raises the profile of the function within the business. If you're someone who's selling products into the market, it enables the business to understand that, that is it's kind of like the bit the consumer sees and experiences. And if you're getting that right, then everything else comes in to support that. And so, which takes us back to the kind of the AI thing. You need designers sitting at the front end of the business who know the customers really well. They know where they're going. And it's kind of like, guys, we're doing all of this work and it's great, but sustainability directives are coming through and we're not going to be able to find these materials. We need to find another way of manufacturing something, or we need to find other suppliers. Let's rethink about how we might deliver something. And it's quite often when designers find themselves backed into a corner, I think they do brilliant work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we like constraint.
Throw a really
constraint's
tough,
a good thing. Yeah, so it's good.
Chuck a really hard brief at them. Yeah. You're letting them off far too easily.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got a completely light-hearted question now, because so obviously, having known you for a while, I know you're obsessed, and I'd love to know why. If anybody's ever seen any of your social media feeds, you certainly were, for some stage, you were obsessed with construction cranes. Where does that come from?
The reality is you can't take a bad picture of a crane. Okay, it's
so nuanced.
Yeah, it's always going to have those angles in it. It almost doesn't matter, and you will always have that dichotomy of something that is big and technical sitting next to probably something that is very beautiful and ancient. But I think that the secret really is probably, I was one of those kids that got Lego, but I think I probably always wanted Meccano. Do you know the Meccanos? So I wanted the metal strips with
just
nuts
something
and
a
bolts.
little bit more technical, a bit more mechanical,
it was a big endeavour, for my family to buy me Lego. I'm very grateful for the cowboy village I got on my 13th birthday. I think there's a childhood problem there, isn't there?
So you haven't started buying Meccano now and stuff yourself? You haven't gone back.
Someone actually messaged me and said they invited me to go and drive a crane. Who knew it was called driving? Did you know the person?
Crane drivers,
It's a cab. I didn't know it was a crane driver. It doesn't go anywhere. They spin around in circles. I can't. I'm scared of heights.
Oh my God.
So maybe there's a weird fascination there.
It's a ground crane or something, underground or something we can find.
So
amazing. Okay, there was one thing I've heard you say around the DBA, which is good design is good business, and that came from the second president of IBM, Thomas Watson. What does good design being good business mean to you?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when something happens and then you revisit these phrases, I don't think good design is good business anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's good enough. It's got to be great design is going to be good for business. Years ago, I spoke with someone who was in the process of bringing all of design in-house for a very big brand. But he said 20% of it he couldn't bring in-house. So 80% of it he could. And the conversation, there were a bunch of us in the room concentrated on the 80%. You can imagine the consultants were thinking, we're going to lose work. Yeah. All of that work going in-house. And the obvious question never got asked. And so at the end I said, what's the 20%? What's the 20% that you can't bring in-house? And it's that front-end thought leadership piece, the thinking that drives businesses into new space. And it was because he couldn't create the environment within a large corporation for that freedom of thought to be able to happen.
That's interesting.
Consultants sit outside looking in. Yeah. So if there are consultancies listening to this, you need to get your head around this because there's something that the people you're working for don't, which is if you specialise and you've got a level of insight and understanding on an industry sector, it is very valuable. It's the thing that allows you to drop in and start working for a business very, very quickly. And he knew that he would never be able to see into other businesses like his, but he knew there was a group of people out there who could.
Yeah.
And so the 20%, I think, that is the same answer to AI. AI will take good out of the market. AI will be able to do good. I think it has to be great design. The 20% now has to be great. Being a good designer is not going to be enough. Mm-hmm. You need to be a great designer. We need more great designers because we need businesses to continue to develop products and services that impact our lives in the way that we want them to and need them to, that don't impact the planet in the way that we don't want them to and don't need them to, and so on. And those aren't the dropouts in the school system that do that work. I'm quite serious about, if we can't spot creative talent in young people, push them down the academic route. Yeah. Because if you look at the scale and the magnitude of the challenges that we face as a society, as the human race, you're going to need some really clever people to think through what the future looks like and get us there. And of course, the business context we work in is the bit that delivers us to there. But they've got nothing to deliver without the designers in the room. Amazing.
Okay, so that's the message, from good to great. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to do something. It's a tradition on our podcast, which I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Right. We ask the same 3 questions to everybody who comes on. So, what does good design, it doesn't have to be design, but what does good mean to you? What is its role on a societal level? And how does it impact everyday experience for the user? So it could be design, could be fashion, could be architecture. So I'll say again, what does good design mean for you, or architecture or fashion? What is its role on a societal level? And how does it impact everyday experience of the user?
So for me, good design is when I look at something and I just get it. And I look at some logos that people have designed, and you don't need to know what the company does because the logo tells you. And you don't need some great big pitch deck from the agencies to tell you what it all means. So at a personal level, it's when I can look at stuff and I just get it. I can see what the train of thought was here, and it's really clever.
So what role on a societal level?
Yeah, so as a societal level, good design is in essence, is about making life better for people. I think we want to see everyone prosper, don't we? And I don't think about prosperity as necessarily being money. This is about, it could be prosper in character, in well-being. So anything that shifts the dial and enables people to live more prosperous lives. And that could be anything from, a better app to book your appointment with the doctor to a holiday of a lifetime type thing. And everything in between. Changing the light bulb. Yeah. Going to a toilet where you can actually lock the door and it's not going to flip open halfway through. That's the societal impact I'd like to see.
That's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting hearing people's answers, because obviously you said it's design that you get, but I would say great design gets you. So, I've often spoken about this.
I don't actually think it needs to work for anyone else.
No, exactly. And it shouldn't. It should feel like it's mass produced, but it's creative for you. So we had this discussion a while back. So, 1 billion people use Lixil products every single day around the world. Yeah. And our job really is to make it feel like they weren't mass-produced products. They were tailored to that person. And that when you pick that thing up, I've heard various people talk about this. We had a guest on called Narinder Segu, and he was talking about it's almost like a prosthetic, it's an extension of your arm, these things. But, you should use or interact with these things, whatever they are. But you should just be like, wow, how did it know I needed that? But I knew how to navigate that thing. I knew where the button was. I didn't have to learn. I didn't change my behavior to adapt to the product. Everything was thought out like it was made for you. And you're right, you shouldn't have to adapt or think. It's almost like if that product gets you and feels like it's tailored for you. And I guess that's the difference between a tailored suit and a mass-produced item. Yeah. But, the great designs, I think and the great things, they tend to get people but still feel individual.
I think, one of the areas I think where we still let ourselves down is where a group of us have to come together to do something. So if you take your scenario and your products are sitting in, let's say it's a toilet in a museum or something, I think the challenge there is that you've actually got a group of designers who have to work together, because it's not necessarily the manufacturer of the tap who may be designing the toilet.
Absolutely.
And so I have a particular fixation with toilet design. So I've got the biggest set of photos. I could come around and show you my photos.
I can't wait to see that calendar.
I hadn't thought about doing a calendar. But one of them's got, it's actually Jim's picture. One of them's got 2 urinals in the same corner.
Yeah.
You can't stand 2 people using.
Yeah.
So the salesman did his job.
Genius.
But the person who was doing the design layout never thought about it. But it's a whole series of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I think we need to do better as an industry to hook up with the other professionals in the spheres in which we operate to be able to
100%.
really make a great experience for people.
200%. I think, we work a lot with architects, and, I read this interesting book about data bias, and, and if you take a theatre, for example, if you go the interlude, you go outside, all the females are queuing up for the toilet, no queues for the men, because the architect has, let's say, equally divided the amount of toilets in the building, when had they have done any kind of really research or had any insight,
take longer,
they would know that women take much longer to go to the bathroom. So therefore, they should have proportionately more bathrooms. So therefore, what happens, the interlude, the guys are having a great time at the bar having a drink, but often women don't get that opportunity because they're waiting for a queue. So having that insight that you could create a better experience, that's something where the manufacturer of the product to speed that environment up, the architect who's creating it, et cetera. You have to work together to get the best. That's why we actually work a lot with architects, because understanding the context in which your product will be placed means you'll create a better experience. Number 2, which designer / business leader, past or present, has had the most significant influence on your perspective of design or business, and why?
It wouldn't be one person. So there are things that I remember. So the 80-20% thing, I remember that conversation, and that person knows who they are. The person who, when I started my career, I reckon they were probably the best design manager in Europe. I can remember conversations with that person. A lot of the way in which I would articulate what design is, if I was talking to a business audience, a very different language that I would use if I'm talking to a business audience or a design audience, stemmed from conversations I had with him. And he was very generous with his time on that. He was a chair for the Design Effectiveness Awards, the judges on the Design Effectiveness Awards. You get those level of insight and sound bites from people that you just think, great. I was talking to a project manager on a project that we support yesterday, and she coined a really simple phrase for summing something up that I've been struggling with. And I write it all down. It'll come back out again when it's needed. It's one of the amazing things about this job. I mean, it's a totally amazing job to have.
Yeah.
Because you can literally pick up the phone to anyone and ask them anything, and they'll probably tell you. Yeah, it's just, so the industry, my gratitude goes out to the industry.
Why choose one when you can choose many?
Yeah, there are lots of them.
Absolutely. Okay, and finally, love it or hate it? This is a really strange question the way it's worded. I don't know if we have to change this at some stage, but love it or hate it? What's the current design macro trend you can't stop thinking about? And what do you think it says about the broader cultural landscape? So a current macro trend you can't stop thinking about.
Yeah, so I've got lots of love thems and hates thems. We could be here for another.
We've got some time.
Yeah, there's the language thing, sloppy language. I don't think we articulate things well enough. Do you know, I think it might be something like that. I think we're a bit lazy when it comes to language. And so we hear someone coin something and we all jump on the bandwagon. Mm-hmm. We're actually all saying the wrong thing. For an industry that is known for the mavericks and the, kind of the creatives and the entrepreneurship and the uniqueness of thought and the level of curiosity that we have, every now and then you just find everyone's gone down the road of thinking one thing about one thing.
Yeah.
So I think the macro trend is please don't get lazy as a designer. Please continue to develop your thinking on things. Do not go along with the crowd. Be prepared to stand out from the crowd for the things that you really believe in. And if you don't think there is anyone that you can talk to about this stuff, come and talk to me. The DBA it's also a vehicle for people, for the industry to do whatever it needs to do. We can host things, we can set things up. We're having a conversation later with a group of people. There are just things that are in my gift to be able to do. Come and ask us. But yeah, don't get lazy.
Good. Okay.
Continue reading insatiably. Read insatiably. It's all that, at the core, designers need to stay great designers. You need to really understand. Yeah. continue to understand the context in which you operate, because it's changing massively fast.
It's a lovely quote. Childlike curiosity. I really want to keep that for as long as I can, but keep that childlike curiosity. It's amazing. Keeps you young. Deborah, thank you so much. It's been amazing, and I know we're going to spend some more time talking about design. It's like a passion of ours, so that's great, and business, of course, because design drives tremendous value to business. I think and the more that we can support people, the more that we can improve through things like the Design Effectiveness Awards, I think that's going to really help design to elevate itself in organizations, and for consultants also to really show their value and how they can turn businesses around and maybe find opportunity that the business or an organization didn't know existed. So that's really exciting. So, thanks so much for sharing that. And like you said, we can come onto your website at the DBA and we can look at case studies and we can start to understand how other organizations have used design to generate value. So hopefully lots of people will do that as well. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much for listening to Facets of Design from Lixor Global Design. Please be sure to subscribe, share and follow us on Instagram at Lixor Global Design. Stay tuned for more insightful conversations with innovators shaping the future of the creative industries.